Hi, my name is Michaela, and today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about what is hydrocephalus. So, hydrocephalus is obviously a really big word, and I'm going to break it down for you. So, hydro means water. You've probably heard this in other senses like hydroplane, hydro flask. This is water. And then cephalus means head. And so, what hydrocephalus is when the cerebrospinal fluid is not flowing properly. So the cerebrospinal fluid, I know, another big medical term, means it's basically when the clear watery liquid fills the space between the actinoid membrane and the pia mater, which is a space kind of in between, it's in between the brain and the skull. And so there are two different types of hydrocephalus. So this can happen in two different ways. Like, why is it formed? What does it mean? So there are two different types. There's the communication hydrocephalus, dash non-obstructive, and this occurs when the cerebrospinal fluid, that watery liquid, flows out of the ventricles into the spinal canal, but it is not being absorbed normally by the tissue surrounding the brain. So it's just not being absorbed properly. But then there's non-communication, that's obstructive. And this is when the cerebrospinal fluid doesn't flow properly between or out of the brain ventricles. So this is when the brain ventricles are not doing what they're supposed to be doing because there's something wrong, whether that could be an obstruction or like the tube's just not big enough for how much cerebrospinal fluid is coming out of it, or it could just be because it was just not built properly when being in the womb, or usually this one's not as common with hydrocephalus patients who are older in life. So this is kind of a visual of what hydrocephalus looks like. So kind of to picture what I was showing you is these are those ventricles, those blue part right here. And what happens is the cerebrospinal fills those up and then it has nowhere to go because there's either a blockage or it's too small, it's not draining fast enough. And what that does is that puts pressure on the rest of your head. And so this is where we get symptoms and things like that. But before we get there, how do we fix it? What's it all about? People can't live like that, right? They can't live with cerebrospinal fluid filling up their brain. They can't. And so that's when they put a shunt in. And a shunt is basically replacing what that the valves were supposed to be doing properly. So a valve is like a tube, and the tube is draining the cerebrospinal fluid from the head to the stomach. And that helps relieve the pressure from those ventricles because then those ventricles can just lightly pour out the water the cerebrospinal fluid that goes out of it, and the shunt can take off most of that pressure. And you can see there is this gray little device in the brain on that shunt. And what that does is this is super cool. It gets to drain how much water is flowing out of that. But out of the shunt. And that is more common with the non-obstructive case that I was just explaining there a minute ago, or the obstructive. The obstructive one is when there's issues with like narrowing and things like that. And so there might just be an excessive amount of cerebrospinal fluid, which is why those valves are not doing the job that they're supposed to do. And so what that shunt does is it just kind of helps relieve that pressure. So this is little Caden. He was diagnosed at 10 days old with hydrocephalus. This is quite a bit of a later case of hydrocephalus. Usually, unless it's pretty obvious, you can't check it from an x-ray. So usually it's just kind of the first couple of days once the babies come out of the womb. And as you can see, he's got this kind of like bubble on his forehead. And what that is the cerebrospinal fluid is actually it's putting all of the pressure right there. It's building up. And so as you can see on the far right picture, they've taken care of it and his head is starting to calm down. But what happens in other countries where these shunts are not able to be put in is basically the head just continues to swell until they become brain damage first, then brain dead, and then they will pass away. So this is definitely a super serious condition. So how does it get diagnosed? When does this happen? Is this something you even need to worry about? Well, luckily for you, it's mainly just diagnosed with children. So it is the leading brain surgery in children is putting in this shunt for victims who have hydrocephalus. So what happens in children, usually how you know that you have hydrocephalus or how you know a baby has hydrocephalus is usually, like I showed you, Caden's head was swelling up or they end up just vomiting. In young and middle-aged adults, usually it's because they'll get migraines or urinary issues, also vision loss. And when it comes to the migraines, they mainly happen when you stand up. And that's because that pressure is being put on your frontal lobe. But when you're laying down, it relieves that pressure. For elders, it's very uncommon for elders to get hydrocephalus. It's mainly more common in children. And then sometimes in a rare case can happen in middle age and older. And so what happens then is also those urinary problems, cognitive problems, memory loss, things like that, and difficulty walking. So why does this matter to you? What is it all about? Tell me more. Well, hydrocephalus is a big part of my story because I was born with hydrocephalus and I have a shunt. And so the interesting thing about this is the shunt doesn't really cure the hydrocephalus. It's just kind of like a temporary solution. And these shunts have not been, there's been a lot of research on them, but there hasn't been a lot of new research and not a lot of people are talking about it. And so I've put here some links for some places you can go donate, but also places that you can go volunteer and kind of hear about these people's stories and how hydrocephalus has deeply impacted their life. Luckily for me, I haven't had a whole lot of long-term problems. I did have some vision issues growing up, but those were luckily able to be solved. And then I just have some growth development problems. But other than that, everything's gone pretty smoothly for me, but it hasn't been that way for everybody else. So there are ways for you to volunteer. There is the Walk to End Hydrocephalus along with swimming events, and you can host a party yourself to try to be an activist for people who have hydrocephalus because it is so not talked about even by patients who have hydrocephalus. So I was actually able to do a Walk to End Hydrocephalus myself, where I was able to meet a lot of cool people who've had a lot of brain surgeries. As you can see here on the left, this is a girl named Haley. She's only 5 years old and has had 5 brain surgeries. I'm 19 and I've only had 5 brain surgeries. So she has really had a tough life. And it is hard because every brain surgery obviously comes with a very high risk. Then there's this kid named Grant. He's 12 years old. He's had 2 surgeries. And most of the time, these kids can go on with not a lot of other problems, but it is common that the shunt causes, or the hydrocephalus and the shunt together cause long-term after problems. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an information you might need to know about hydrocephalus and the medical condition that is the leading brain surgery in children to put shunts in. If you have any questions or comments moving forward, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.